I, 58F, have always believed that family is the bedrock of a good life. It is the one thing you can count on when everything else falls away. After my husband, Robert, passed away 5 years ago, that belief became my anchor. All I had left of our life together was our son, Mark, and the beautiful family he was building with his wife, Sarah. I poured all my love and a significant portion of my resources into ensuring their happiness. I wanted them to have the comfortable start that Robert and I had to work so hard for. I wanted them to have a home filled with love and laughter, a place where our grandchildren, Lily and Tom, could grow up safe and cherished. Christmas was always the pinnacle of that family ideal. It was our most sacred tradition, a time when all the small worries of the year melted away, replaced by the warm glow of twinkling lights and the sound of children's laughter. Ever since Mark and Sarah had the children, Christmas Eve and Christmas Day were spent at their house. It made sense. It was their home, and I did not want to disrupt the magic for the little ones by making them travel. I would arrive on the 23rd, laden with presents and enough home-baked cookies to feed an army, and I would stay through Boxing Day. I helped Sarah with the cooking, played with the grandchildren, and watched Mark beam with pride at the life he had built. Those days were the highlight of my year. They were the moments I lived for, the proof that the love Robert and I had shared was continuing on through the next generation. That is why the phone call, just a week before Christmas, felt like a physical blow. It was so unexpected, so casual in its cruelty, that for a moment I could not even process the words. I had called Mark to coordinate my arrival time. It was a simple, logistical call I made every year. "Hi, honey," I started, my voice cheerful. I was just thinking about my drive up. Would it be better for me to arrive in the morning on the 23rd, or should I wait until after the kids' nap time in the afternoon? There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, followed by some muffled shuffling. I heard Mark's voice, distant and hesitant, say, "Hold on, Mom. Sarah wants to talk to you." My heart gave a little flutter of unease. Sarah and I were not best friends, but we had always been cordial. She was polite, if a little cool at times, but I had always chalked that up to her being a busy mother. I never imagined it was anything more. Her voice came on the line, bright and artificially sweet.
¿Y Carol?
"How are you?" she asked, the question a mere formality. "I'm wonderful, dear," I replied, my own cheerfulness starting to feel a bit forced. "I was just asking Mark about my arrival for the holidays." Another pause. This one was longer, heavier. I could almost feel the tension crackling through the phone. "Oh," Sarah said finally, her tone shifting from sweet to dismissive. "About that. We're actually doing something much smaller this year. Just a quiet Christmas with me, Mark, and the kids. My parents are coming for a few hours on Christmas Day, but it's very low-key." I waited for the invitation, the part where she would say, "But of course, you should still come on the 23rd. You're not a guest, you're family," but it never came. The silence stretched on, becoming more and more uncomfortable. I had to be the one to break it. "Oh," I said, my voice small. "So, you're not expecting me then?" The words felt like stones in my mouth. I was forcing her to say it plainly, hoping I had misunderstood. I was giving her an out, a chance to correct this horrible misunderstanding. Sarah did not take it. "No," she said, her voice now completely devoid of warmth. "We weren't expecting you. We just figured you'd have your own plans." My own plans? As if I would ever make other plans for Christmas. As if there was any place on earth I would rather be than with my son and my grandchildren. The casual cruelty of that assumption stole my breath. I felt a cold dread wash over me. I was being uninvited. I was being discarded. "I see," I managed to whisper, my throat tight with unshed tears. "Well, I suppose I'll let you go then. I'm sure you're very busy." I did not want to give her the satisfaction of hearing me cry. "Okay, Carol. Have a good holiday," she said, and then the line went dead. She had hung up.
Just like that.
I stood there in my silent kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. The silence in my own home had never felt so profound, so suffocating. The bedrock of my life had just crumbled beneath my feet. For a long time, I just stood there, unable to move. The cheerful Christmas carols playing softly on the radio in the background suddenly sounded mocking. My mind replayed Sarah's words over and over again. "We weren't expecting you." Each repetition was like a fresh stab to the heart. It was not just the words themselves, but the cold, dismissive way she had said them. There was no apology, no regret, not even a hint of sympathy for how I might feel.
It was a simple statement of fact.
I was not wanted. I was an inconvenience. My presence was not required for their perfect little family Christmas. My first instinct was to call Mark back.
He would fix this.
He would tell me Sarah was just stressed, that she did not mean it. He would never let this happen. He loved me. He was my son. I fumbled with my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely press the numbers. I hit his contact and raised the phone to my ear, my heart pounding with a desperate hope. It rang once.
Twice.
3 times. Then it went to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Mark. Leave a message." I hung up without saying anything. He had rejected my call. He knew I would call back, and he had chosen not to answer. He was siding with her. That realization was even more painful than Sarah's initial rejection. I tried to tell myself there could be a million reasons why he did not answer. Maybe he was driving. Maybe he was in a meeting. But I knew better. In my gut, I knew he was standing right there next to his wife, letting her handle the dirty work of pushing his own mother out into the cold. I sank into a kitchen chair, the festive red and green placemats on the table suddenly looking garish and absurd. My gaze fell upon a framed photo on the counter. It was from last Christmas. Mark had his arms around me and Sarah, and we were all smiling, Lily and Tom sitting on our laps with chocolate-smeared faces. It had been such a happy day. Had it all been a lie? Had I been so blind? My mind started to race, connecting dots I had previously refused to see. There had been signs, small things that I had brushed off as insignificant. The time Sarah had forgotten to tell me about Lily's school play until the day after happened. The way she would make little passive-aggressive comments about my gifts, saying things like, "Oh, another hand-knitted sweater. How quaint." I had always made excuses for her. "She's tired.
She's stressed.
She's just not as sentimental as I am." I had wanted so badly to believe that she was a good person, that she loved my son, and that, by extension, she at least respected me. Now I saw it all for what it was, a pattern of subtle exclusion, a slow and steady campaign to minimize my role in their lives. I decided to send Mark a text message. It was less confrontational than a call, and he could not ignore a written message as easily. "Mark," I typed, my fingers stiff. "I just spoke with Sarah. I think there has been a misunderstanding about Christmas. Please call me." I stared at the screen, waiting for the 3 little dots to appear, signaling that he was typing a reply. Seconds stretched into minutes. Nothing. My hope began to wither. After what felt like an eternity, my phone buzzed. A message from Mark. My heart leaped, only to sink again as I read his words. "Mom, Sarah is just really stressed with the holidays. We can talk about this later. Things are just crazy right now." Later. The word hung in the air, a flimsy excuse designed to placate me, to push the problem down the road until it hopefully went away on its own. He was not denying what Sarah had said. He was not rushing to fix it. He was validating her actions with his inaction. He was managing me, not defending me. The disappointment was so sharp it felt like a physical ache in my chest. This was not about stress. This was a deliberate choice. They had decided, together, that I was not a part of their Christmas celebration. And my own son did not have the courage to tell me to my face. A cold, hard anger began to replace the hurt. It started as a small ember in the pit of my stomach and slowly grew into a roaring fire.
How dare they?
After everything I had done for them, I was not just a doting mother and grandmother. I was their benefactor. I was the reason they were living in their beautiful 4-bedroom house in a top-rated school district. I had given them the down payment as a gift, a sum so large it had taken a significant chunk out of my retirement savings. And that was not all. To help them avoid the banks and the crushing weight of a high-interest mortgage, I had set up a private loan for the remainder of the balance. Robert and I had planned it for years. We had wanted to give our son a debt-free start to his adult life. I was not just their mother. I was their banker. A very, very generous one. The terms of our agreement were incredibly lenient. I charged them a tiny amount of interest, far below market rate, just enough to cover the taxes. The monthly payments they made to me were a fraction of what they would have paid to a commercial lender. It was a gift, a massive, life-altering gift, wrapped in the guise of a loan to allow them to maintain their pride. And this was how they repaid me? By treating me like a nuisance, an unwanted obligation to be cast aside when it was inconvenient. The sheer ingratitude of it all was breathtaking. My husband would be spinning in his grave. He had adored Mark, but he had also been a man of principle. He believed in respect. He believed in honoring your commitments. Mark and Sarah were doing neither. I stood up from the table, my body feeling strangely energized by the anger. The tears were gone, replaced by a steely resolve. I walked into my home office, a room filled with memories of Robert. His old leather chair, his collection of history books, the faint scent of his pipe tobacco that still clung to the curtains. I sat down at his desk and pulled out the file cabinet key. I opened the bottom drawer, the one marked Financials, and pulled out the thick folder labeled Mark and Sarah Mortgage. I opened it, the crisp legal documents feeling cool and solid in my hands. I was not just some sad, lonely old woman they could dismiss with a text message. I was a person with power, and they had just made the colossal mistake of reminding me of that fact. My mind was suddenly very clear. The path forward was no longer shrouded in the fog of hurt and confusion. They did not want me for Christmas.
Fine.
But they were about to find out that my generosity had terms and conditions. And they had just violated every single one of them. My first call was not to a lawyer or even back to my son. It was to my sister, Susan. She was 2 years older than me, and her pragmatism had always been a grounding force in my life. While I tended to see the best in people, Susan saw them for exactly who they were, no sugarcoating. She had never been particularly fond of Sarah. She called her the princess in private, a nickname I had always chided her for. Now, I was beginning to think she had been right all along. Susan answered on the second ring, her voice warm and familiar. "Carol, I was just thinking about you. Are you all packed for your trip to Mark's?" Her innocent question was like a punch to the gut. "No, Susan," I said, my voice flat and emotionless. "I'm not going." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "What do you mean you're not going? Did something happen? Are the kids okay?" Her immediate concern for the children was so typical of her. "The kids are fine," I said. "Their mother, however, has informed me that they weren't expecting me for Christmas." I relayed the entire conversation with Sarah, followed by the weak, dismissive text from Mark. I told her everything, the words pouring out of me in a torrent of pent-up frustration and pain. When I was finished, there was a long, heavy silence. I knew Susan was choosing her words carefully. She could have easily said, "I told you so," but she was too good a sister for that. Instead, when she finally spoke, her voice was filled with a cold fury that mirrored my own. "That ungrateful little witch," she hissed. "After everything you have done for them. Everything. And Mark just let her? He just stood by and let her throw his own mother out of Christmas?" Her anger was validating. It made me feel less like I was overreacting and more like my feelings were justified. "He sent a text, Susan," I said, the memory still stinging. "He said she was stressed." Susan scoffed, a harsh, derisive sound. "Stressed? Please. That's the oldest excuse in the book for bad behavior. She's not stressed, Carol. She's a user. She has been from day one. She sees you as a bank, not a person. And now that she has what she wants, the big house and the comfortable life, she thinks she can cut you out. What are you going to do?" It was not a question of if, but what.
Susan knew me well.
She knew I would not let this stand. "I don't know yet," I admitted, though a plan was already beginning to form in the back of my mind. "But I'm not going to just roll over and accept this. Robert would never have stood for it." "Good," Susan said firmly. Robert would have read them the riot act. You need to remember who you are, Carol. You are not some charity case they can take or leave. You hold all the cards. That house, that perfect life they're so proud of, you own it. Don't you ever forget that. Her words were like a shot of adrenaline. She was right. I had been so focused on being a loving mother and grandmother that I had forgotten I was also a shrewd woman who had helped my husband run a successful business for 30 years. I knew how to read a contract. I knew the value of leverage. After I hung up with Susan, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I spread the mortgage documents out on Robert's desk. I read through every line, every clause, every bit of fine print. It had been a few years since I had looked at it in detail. David, my brother-in-law and our family lawyer, had drafted it to be as favorable to Mark and Sarah as possible, but it was still a legally binding contract. And a contract has rules. As I read, one section in particular caught my eye. The clause on defaults. The agreement stated that the nominal monthly payments were due on the first of every month. There was a 15-day grace period, after which the payment was officially considered late. If 2 consecutive payments were missed, the borrower was in default of the loan. My heart started to beat a little faster. I pulled up my banking records on my computer. I had set up an automatic notification for when their payment was deposited each month. I scrolled back through my emails. There was a notification for the October 1st payment, but there was nothing for November 1st, and nothing for December 1st. My eyes widened in disbelief. They had not paid me in 2 months. 2 months. And they had not said a single word. No phone call to explain a delay, no text message to apologize. Nothing. They had simply stopped paying. The audacity was staggering. They were planning some kind of Christmas celebration with Sarah's family, a celebration I was explicitly uninvited from, and they were doing it while defaulting on the loan that provided the very roof over their heads. A loan from me. The disrespect was layered, deep, and utterly unforgivable. This was not just an emotional betrayal anymore. This was a financial one. It was a breach of contract. And that gave me options. Serious options. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The emotional turmoil of the past few hours began to recede, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. This was no longer just about a canceled Christmas invitation. This was about a fundamental lack of respect and a complete disregard for the enormous generosity they had been shown. My mind flashed back to a conversation I'd had with Sarah a few months ago. She had been complaining about money, about how tight things were. She mentioned wanting to take the kids on a real vacation, not just a weekend at the lake. She had hinted that maybe I could forgive a few months of mortgage payments to help them save up. I had gently told her that the payments were already a gift, and that it was important for them to learn to live within their means. She had dropped the subject, but now I saw her request in a new, sinister light. She had not been asking for a favor. She had been testing the waters. And when I did not give her what she wanted, she and Mark had apparently decided to just take it anyway. The next piece of the puzzle fell into place almost by accident. I was scrolling through social media later that evening, a mindless habit to numb the turmoil in my head. I rarely looked at Sarah's page. It was mostly filled with curated photos of her perfect life that always made me feel a little inadequate. But on a whim, I typed her name into the search bar. Her profile was private, but her sister, Jessica, had a public page. And Jessica was a prolific poster. I clicked on her profile, and my blood ran cold. There, at the very top of her feed, was a post from 2 days ago. It was a picture of a luxurious ski chalet, nestled in a snowy mountain landscape. The caption read, "Cannot wait for our big family Christmas ski trip. So excited to have the whole clan together. Counting down the days." Below the picture, in the comment section, was a flurry of excited messages. I scanned the names. Sarah's was there. So excited. "The kids are going to lose their minds," she had written, followed by a string of snowflake emojis. Her mother, Helen, had commented too. "It's going to be the best Christmas ever. So glad we can all be together."
The whole clan.
All together. A quiet Christmas. My mind reeled. The lies were so blatant, so shameless. They were not having a small, low-key holiday at home. They were going on an expensive ski trip with her entire family, a trip they were likely funding with the mortgage money they had withheld from me. I was not just being excluded. I was being used to finance the very event I was forbidden from attending. The betrayal was so complete, so profound, that it almost defied comprehension. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I had been a fool. A blind, sentimental fool. I took a screenshot of the post and the comments. Evidence. I did not know what I was going to do with it yet, but I knew I needed it. This was the final piece of proof I needed. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a calculated, deliberate act of deception and disrespect. They had lied to my face, stolen from me, and planned to celebrate their treachery on a snowy mountaintop while I sat at home alone. The anger was back, stronger than ever. But it was different now. It was not hot and chaotic. It was cold and focused. The hurt was still there, a dull ache deep inside me, but it was no longer the dominant emotion. Now, there was only a sense of grim determination. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness. They had assumed my love was unconditional, a resource they could tap into without consequence. They were about to learn a very hard lesson about the consequences of their actions. My next phone call would be to David. It was time to review the terms of our little agreement in excruciating detail. It was time to remind my son and his wife that every contract has a penalty clause. The next morning, I called David. My voice was steady, betraying none of the emotional storm that had raged inside me for the past 24 hours. David, my late husband's younger brother, was a partner at a respected law firm downtown. He was sharp, pragmatic, and fiercely loyal to Robert's memory, which by extension meant he was loyal to me. He had been the one to structure the mortgage agreement, and I trusted his counsel implicitly. "Carol," he said, his voice warm. "It's good to hear from you. Is everything all right?"
Fine, David, he replied.
"I'm calling on a business matter. I need to ask you a few questions about the loan agreement I have with Mark and Sarah." There was a slight pause. David was perceptive. He knew I would not call him about this unless something was wrong. "Of course," he said, his tone shifting to one of professional concern. "What's on your mind?" I could hear the faint sound of a keyboard clicking as he likely pulled up their file. "I was doing a review of my finances for the end of the year," I began, choosing my words carefully. I was not ready to reveal the full, ugly story just yet. I needed information first. I noticed that I haven't received a payment from them for November or December. I wanted to clarify the terms regarding missed payments. I heard him hum in thought. "Let me see here," he said. "Okay, I have the agreement in front of me. It's pretty straightforward. As we structured it, a payment is officially late after the 15-day grace period. A second consecutive missed payment constitutes a default on the loan." A default. I repeated the word, letting it hang in the air. "And what are my options in the event of a default?" My heart was thudding in my chest, but I kept my voice even. This was the crucial question. "Well," David said slowly, "the agreement is what's known as a demand loan. That was intentional, to give you maximum flexibility and protection. In the event of a default, you have the right, at your sole discretion, to call the entire remaining balance of the loan due." He paused, then added, "Immediately." The word echoed in my mind. Immediately. The power of that single word was immense. "So, I could legally require them to pay back the full amount they owe me?" Asked just to be certain. "Yes," David confirmed. "They would have a standard period, typically 30 days, to secure new financing and pay you in full. If they failed to do so, you could begin foreclosure proceedings on the property foreclosure." The word was ugly, final. The thought of taking my son's home away from him, the home where my grandchildren lived, was a heavy one. But then I pictured Sarah's smug comment on that social media post, and my resolve hardened. "Carol," David's voice cut through my thoughts, laced with concern. "Is there a problem? 2 missed payments is unusual for them. Is everything okay, financially?" This was my chance to tell him, to lay out the whole sordid tale of betrayal. But I held back. I was not ready for that conversation. I needed to process this new information, to fully understand the power I now held. "I'm not sure," I said vaguely. "I'm just reviewing my options." "Thank you, David." That's all I needed to know for now. I could tell he was not satisfied with my answer, but he was too professional to press me. "All right, Carol. But if you need anything, and I mean anything at all, you call me. Day or night, I will," I promised, and we ended the call. I sat at Robert's desk for a long time after that, staring at the mortgage file. I had the power to completely upend their lives. I could force them to sell the house they loved, the house I had given them. I could take back the financial security I had so generously provided. It was a staggering thought. Was I really capable of doing something so drastic? A week ago, the answer would have been an unequivocal no. I would have done anything for my son, forgiven any transgression. But that was before I had been so coldly and deliberately cast aside. Before I had discovered the depth of their deception. The sleepless night that followed was not filled with tears. It was filled with a cold, hard clarity. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and I saw everything with a painful new perspective. This was not just about a canceled Christmas invitation. It was about a fundamental breakdown of family, of trust, of love. Mark and Sarah had come to see me not as a person, but as a utility. I was the provider of the house, the free babysitter, the source of endless gifts and financial support. My role was to give, and their role was to take. And when my presence became inconvenient, when it interfered with their desired lifestyle, they had no qualms about cutting me out. I thought about my grandchildren, Lily and Tom. The idea of them being caught in the middle of this was agonizing. But what kind of lesson were they learning from their parents? They were learning that it is okay to lie. They were learning that it is okay to take advantage of people's kindness. They were learning that family is conditional, something to be valued only when it is convenient. Robert would have been appalled. He had been a man of immense integrity, and he had tried to instill that in Mark. Somewhere along the way, my son had lost his moral compass. By the time the sun began to stream through my bedroom window, I had made my decision.
I was not going to let this stand.
I was not going to be a silent, long-suffering martyr. I was going to fight back. Not out of spite, but out of a desperate need to reclaim my dignity and self-respect. They had broken the contract, both legally and emotionally, and there had to be consequences. My plan began to take shape, not as a single, explosive act, but as a series of deliberate, calculated steps. I would give them one last chance, one final opportunity to be honest with me. And if they failed that test, I would not hesitate to use the power I held. I got out of bed, showered, and dressed. I felt a sense of purpose I had not felt in years. The grieving widow, the doting mother, the lonely old woman, those parts of me were still there, but they were no longer in charge. Today, I was my husband's wife, a woman who understood business, a woman who would not be taken for a fool. My first move was to call Mark. I needed to hear it from him, directly. I needed to give him the chance to tell me the truth, without his wife whispering in his ear. I dialed his number, my stomach in a tight knot. He answered on the third ring, his voice wary. "Mom, is everything okay?" He knew it was not. My call was an unwelcome intrusion into the neat little lie he was living. "No, Mark, everything is not okay," I said, my voice calm and even. "I need to talk to you about Christmas." I heard him sigh, a sound of pure exasperation. "Mom, I told you. Sarah's really stressed. Her parents are coming, and she wants everything to be perfect. It's just going to be a small thing this year." He was sticking to the script. The lie was so practiced, so smooth. It made my skin crawl. This was my moment. I could either accept his pathetic excuse and slink away, or I could confront him with the truth.
Il chose confrontation.
"A small thing, Mark?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Or a big family ski trip with all of Sarah's relatives?" The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head as he tried to figure out how I knew. He was trapped, and he knew it. When he finally spoke, his voice was a weak, stammering mess. Who told you that?" he asked, the question itself an admission of guilt. It doesn't matter who told me, Mark, I said, pressing my advantage. What matters is that you lied to me. You and your wife looked me in the eye, figuratively speaking, and you lied. You told me you were having a quiet Christmas at home when you were planning an expensive vacation.
Why?
His excuses came tumbling out, a pathetic cascade of deflections and blame shifting. It was a surprise from Sarah's parents. They just booked it last week. We were going to tell you. Sarah didn't want to hurt your feelings. Each excuse was more flimsy than the last. He was trying to paint himself as a victim of circumstance, a passive participant in his own life. Don't you dare blame this on Sarah's parents, I snapped, my patience wearing thin. And don't you dare pretend you were trying to protect my feelings. You hurt my feelings far more by lying than you ever would have by telling me the truth. You made a choice, Mark. You chose to exclude me and to deceive me. That was your decision. He was silent again, a cowed, guilty silence. I decided it was time to raise the stakes. This was not just about the emotional betrayal anymore. It was time to connect the dots for him. And while you've been busy planning this lavish trip, I continued, my voice like ice, you seem to have forgotten something else. Something rather important. What are you talking about? He asked, his voice laced with confusion. I'm talking about your mortgage payments, Mark, I said slowly, letting each word land with maximum impact. You are 2 months behind. You have been defaulting on your loan to me while planning a vacation you clearly cannot afford. The sputtering on the other end of the line was almost comical. We've had some extra expenses, he protested. The car needed new tires, Lily's braces, we were going to catch up next month. More lies. More excuses. He was like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar, trying to talk his way out of a punishment he knew he deserved. You had extra expenses, so you decided to stop paying the single biggest bill you have, without so much as a phone call to the person you owe the money to? I asked, my voice dripping with scorn. The person who happens to be your mother? The person who gave you the money for that house in the first place? He had no answer for that. There was nothing he could say. The full truth of their actions was laid bare. The entitlement, the ingratitude, the deceit. He had allowed his wife to convince him that my generosity was a given, that my love was a resource to be exploited. He had traded his integrity for a ski trip. I'm very disappointed in you, Mark, I said, my voice softening slightly, with a genuine sadness. Your father would be ashamed. That was the final blow. I heard a choked sob on the other end of the line. I knew I had reached him, but it was too late for apologies. The damage was done. The trust was shattered. We'll talk more about this when you get back from your trip, I said, my voice once again cool and businesslike. Enjoy the snow, and I hung up the phone. The conversation left me feeling drained but resolute. I had given him his chance to come clean, and he had failed miserably. He had lied until he was cornered, and then he had made excuses. There was no remorse, only the fear of being caught. My path forward was now crystal clear. I spent the rest of the day preparing. I called David back and told him everything. The uninvitation, the lies about the ski trip, the missed payments. To his credit, he listened patiently, his anger on my behalf growing with every detail I shared. They did what, he kept saying, his voice a low growl of disbelief. When I was finished, he was silent for a moment. Carol, I am so sorry, he said, his voice filled with a quiet fury. Robert would be, well, I can't even say the words. What do you want to do? You tell me what you want, and I will make it happen. I want to call the loan due, David, I said, the words coming out more easily than I had expected. I want to send them a formal demand letter. I want them to understand that their actions have consequences. Consider it done, he said without hesitation. I'll draft the letter tomorrow. It will be delivered to them by certified mail. It will state that due to their default, the full remaining balance is due within 30 days. It will be ironclad, he paused. Are you sure about this, Carol? This will likely mean they have to sell the house. I'm sure, David, I said firmly. They made their choice. Now I'm making mine. We agreed that I would try to speak with them one last time in person. I did not want to do this through lawyers and letters alone. They needed to see me. They needed to look me in the eye as their carefully constructed world came crashing down around them. I decided I would go to their house after they returned from their trip, under the guise of dropping off the children's Christmas presents. I would not go alone. I asked David to accompany me, to act as my legal counsel and as a witness. He agreed immediately. The week leading up to Christmas was the strangest I have ever experienced. My house was quiet, the halls undecked, the scent of pine and cinnamon conspicuously absent. I did not have the heart to decorate. Instead of baking cookies and wrapping presents, I was communicating with my lawyer and reviewing legal documents. I spent Christmas Eve with Susan and her family. They welcomed me with open arms, their home filled with the warmth and chaos I was so desperately missing. But even surrounded by their love, I felt a profound sense of loss. I watched Susan's children and their spouses interact with her, the easy affection and mutual respect a stark contrast to my own situation. I excused myself at one point, retreating to the quiet of the guest room, and allowed myself to cry. I cried for the family I thought I had, for the son I had lost, and for the happy memories that were now tainted by the bitter truth. On Christmas Day, I received a text message from Mark. It was a picture of Lily and Tom on a ski lift, their faces beaming, bundled up in colorful snowsuits. The caption read, "Merry Christmas, Mom. Wish you were here." The hypocrisy of it was so audacious, it was almost laughable. Wish you were here. As if it had not been their explicit decision that I was not there. As if they had not engineered my absence. I stared at the picture of my beautiful grandchildren, my heart aching. They were innocent pawns in their parents' selfish games. I did not reply to the text. There was nothing left to say. None till I could say it to their faces. They were due back on the 28th. I spent the intervening days in a state of calm anticipation. The emotional storm had passed, leaving behind a hard, quiet resolve. I was not nervous about the coming confrontation. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were a character in a play, about to deliver her final, pivotal lines.
This was no longer about me.
It was about principle. It was about teaching a long-overdue lesson in gratitude and respect. On the morning of the 29th, I called Mark. "Hi, honey," I said, my voice deliberately light and cheerful. "I know you just got back and you're probably exhausted, but I have the kids' presents and I'd love to drop them off. Would this afternoon be a good time?" I could hear the relief in his voice.
He thought this was an olive branch.
He thought I was going to pretend none of it had happened, that I was going to sweep it all under the rug for the sake of keeping the peace. "Yeah, Mom, that would be great," he said eagerly. "We'd love to see you. The kids have been asking about you," a lie, I was sure, but a necessary one for his own conscience. "Wonderful," I said. "We'll see you around 3. The "we" was intentional. I wanted to plant a small seed of unease. "We?" he asked, his voice hesitant. "Oh, yes," I said breezily. "David is going to give me a ride. His office is near my house, and he had some papers for me to sign anyway. It was just convenient. I knew the mention of David, our family lawyer, would set off alarm bells.
Good.
Let them worry. Let them stew in their own anxiety for a few hours. It was a small taste of the turmoil they had put me through. At precisely 3 o'clock, David pulled his sleek, dark sedan up to their curb. I sat in the passenger seat, a large bag of presents at my feet, the formal demand letter tucked safely in my purse. My heart was beating a steady, rhythmic drum. I was ready. We walked up the stone pathway to the front door. The house looked beautiful, as always. A festive wreath with a large red bow hung on the door. Christmas lights twinkled along the roofline. It looked like the home of a happy family. A perfect, curated image, just like Sarah's social media page. David rang the doorbell. A moment later, the door swung open. Sarah stood there, a bright, false smile plastered on her face.
"Carol."
"So good to see you," she chirped. Then her eyes flickered to David, standing silently beside me, and her smile faltered.
"Oh."
"Hello, David. I wasn't expecting you." "Hello, Sarah," David said, his voice polite but cool. Carol and I have some business to discuss with you and Mark. May we come in? Her eyes narrowed slightly. The mask was slipping. She could sense this was not a social call. She stepped aside, a gesture of reluctant hospitality, and allowed us to enter. The house was warm and smelled of cinnamon. The Christmas tree in the corner of the living room was magnificent, piled high with professionally wrapped presents. Mark came out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. His smile was as forced as Sarah's.
Mom.
David. What a surprise. Hello, Mark, I said, my voice even. I put the bag of presents down by the tree. I've brought the gifts for the children. Are they here? They're upstairs, playing, Sarah said quickly, a protective edge to her voice. She did not want them present for this. That suited me just fine.
Good, I said.
Because what we have to discuss is for adults only. Perhaps we should sit down. I led the way to the living room and sat on the plush sofa, the same sofa I had helped them pick out. I patted the seat next to me, and David sat down, placing his leather briefcase on the floor beside him. Mark and Sarah exchanged a nervous glance and perched uneasily on the matching armchairs opposite us. The air in the room was thick with unspoken tension. Sarah was the first to break the silence, her voice brittle with feigned nonchalance. So, Carol, what is this all about? We told you we were busy. Is this really a good time? Her attempt to seize control, to put me on the defensive, was pathetic. I looked at her, my gaze steady and unflinching. The time for politeness was over. We're here to discuss a breach of contract, Sarah, I stated plainly. The color drained from her face. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his chair, refusing to meet my eyes. He looked like a schoolboy about to be disciplined. I don't know what you're talking about, Sarah stammered, though her eyes told a different story. This is our house. You can't just come in here and threaten us. Oh, I'm not threatening you, dear, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. I'm informing you. And as for this being your house, that's a matter of legal debate, isn't it? David. I turned to my brother-in-law, who opened his briefcase and removed a single, crisp envelope. He slid it across the polished surface of the coffee table. It stopped directly in front of Mark. This is a formal demand letter, David said, his voice calm and authoritative. It was the voice he used in a courtroom, a voice that left no room for argument. It outlines your default on the private mortgage agreement you have with Carol. As you know, you have failed to make payments for the months of November and December. Mark stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. He made no move to pick it up. Mom, this is ridiculous, he pleaded, his eyes finally finding mine. They were filled with a desperate, childish panic. It was 2 payments. We were going to pay you back. You can't do this to us over 2 payments. It's not just about the payments, Mark, I said, my voice rising slightly. It's about the lies. It's about the disrespect. You stopped paying me, without a word, and used that money to go on a luxury vacation with her family. I gestured towards Sarah, who flinched as if I had struck her. A vacation you explicitly lied to me about so you could exclude me from my own family's Christmas. Sarah finally found her voice, and it was filled with venom. How dare you, she shrieked, her carefully constructed composure shattering completely. You are a bitter, jealous old woman. You can't stand that Mark has his own family, his own life. You just want to control us. I just looked at her, my expression unreadable. I did not need to defend myself against her hysterical accusations. The facts were on my side. Is that what you think this is about, Sarah? I asked quietly. Control?
No.
This is about consequences. You seem to believe that you are entitled to my generosity, that you can treat me with contempt and still reap the benefits of my kindness. You are mistaken. David spoke again, his voice cutting through Sarah's rising tide of fury. The terms of the agreement are quite clear, he said, addressing both of them. Due to the default, Carol is exercising her right to call the loan. The full remaining balance, which is detailed in that letter, is due and payable within 30 days. Sarah let out a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. You can't be serious, she whispered, turning to Mark. Tell them they can't do this. Tell them, Mark. Mark looked from his hysterical wife to my implacable face, his own expression a mask of defeated horror. He knew there was nothing he could say. He had made his bed, and now he was being forced to lie in it. "You wouldn't dare," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a low, menacing hiss. She was looking directly at me now. It was a challenge. "You would not make your own son and your grandchildren homeless. You are not that cruel." This was the moment of truth. This was the line in the sand. I met her gaze, and for the first time, I let the full force of my anger and my hurt show in my eyes. I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. "I am here now. I am at her house, the house I paid for, and she is challenging my resolve. Watch me," I said. The two words were quiet, but they landed in the silent room with the force of a gunshot. The aftermath was exactly as chaotic as I had anticipated. Sarah completely lost control. She started screaming, calling me names I will not repeat, her face twisted with rage and disbelief. She accused me of trying to ruin her life, of being a monster. Mark just sat there, head in his hands, a broken man. He did not defend me, but he did not defend her either. He was paralyzed by the consequences of his own weakness. I did not engage with Sarah's tirade. There was no point. I simply stood up. "The letter explains everything," I said to the room at large. "You have 30 days. I suggest you contact a bank immediately." David stood with me, picked up his briefcase, and we walked towards the door. As I passed the magnificent Christmas tree, I paused and looked back at them. "I hope you had a lovely holiday," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. Then we left, closing the door softly behind us, leaving them to the ruins of their perfect life. The phone calls started that very evening. The first was from Mark. He was sobbing, begging me to reconsider. "Mom, please don't do this to us," he cried. "Think of the kids. We'll lose everything." His pleas fell on deaf ears. I had already thought of the kids. I had thought of them a great deal. "I am thinking of them, Mark," I said, my voice cold and firm. "I'm thinking about the kind of men and women they will grow up to be. They need to be raised by parents who understand concepts like honesty and integrity. Concepts you have clearly forgotten." He tried to shift the blame, just as he had before. "It was Sarah. She pushed me into it. She convinced me you wouldn't mind if we skipped a couple of payments. She planned the whole trip. I never wanted to hurt you, Mom. You have to believe me." The weakness in his voice was sickening. He was a grown man, a husband and a father, and he was still trying to hide behind a woman's skirts. "It doesn't matter who came up with the idea, Mark," I replied. "You went along with it. You lied to me. You made a choice. You chose her and her family over your own mother. These are the consequences of that choice. The deadline is firm. 30 days." I hung up before he could argue further. The next call, a few days later, was from Sarah's mother, Helen. I had only met her a handful of times, at the wedding and a few of the children's birthday parties. She was a woman who radiated an aura of smug superiority, someone who clearly believed her family was a cut above the rest. Her voice on the phone was dripping with condescension and righteous indignation. "Carol, this is Helen," she announced, as if I should be honored by her call. "I am calling about this dreadful situation with the children. I must say, I am utterly appalled by your behavior." "Are you, Helen?" asked my voice calm. I refused to be baited into an emotional reaction. "Yes, I am," she sniffed. "To threaten your own family, to try and make your own grandchildren homeless right after Christmas, it's simply cruel. It's unconscionable. What kind of a woman are you?" I let her finish, listening patiently to her lecture on family values, the irony of which was apparently lost on her. When she finally paused for breath, I spoke. "Helen," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You raised a daughter who believes that family is a resource to be exploited. You raised her to think that kindness is a weakness and that commitments are optional. She and my son lied to me. They defaulted on a legal agreement, and they used my money to fund a vacation with you. I am not the one who lacks family values here. I am simply closing the account on their bad behavior. Do not call me again." I hung up before she could sputter a reply. My final conversation was with David about a week later. He had been in touch with the lawyer Mark and Sarah had been forced to hire. "They're in a panic," David told me, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. "They've been to 3 different banks. With their current debt-to-income ratio and no down payment, no one will give them a mortgage for the amount they need. The best they can qualify for is a small, 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town." The news did not bring me the joy I thought it might. Instead, I just felt a quiet, sad sense of inevitability. This was the outcome they had earned. "So they'll have to sell the house," I said. It was a statement, not a question. "Yes," David confirmed. "They'll have to sell. And given the current market, they'll need to sell quickly to meet your 30-day deadline. They won't get top dollar. After they pay you back the full amount of the loan, and after they pay the real estate commissions and fees, they'll be left with almost nothing. They'll be starting from scratch. The very thing I had spent years trying to help them avoid. But perhaps it was for the best. Perhaps only by losing everything could they learn to appreciate what they once had." In the end, they sold the house to a young family in a rushed, private sale. David handled all the legal and financial transactions, shielding me from having to have any direct contact with them. The full amount of the outstanding loan was wired directly into my bank account. It was a large sum of money. I looked at the number on the screen, but I felt no sense of victory. I just felt empty. The money had never been the point. I took that money, all of it, and I did the one thing I knew Robert would have wanted me to do. I set up 2 irrevocable trust funds, one for Lily and one for Tom. The funds would be managed by a professional trustee, and the children would not be able to access the money until their 25th birthdays. It was for their education, for a down payment on their own homes someday. It was their inheritance, the legacy from the grandfather they barely knew, and I was going to make sure it was protected from their parents' irresponsibility. I wrote Mark a final letter. I did not write it in anger. I wrote it with a heavy heart, the letter of a mother mourning the son she thought she had raised. I explained what I had done with the money, that it was being held in trust for his children. I told him that I loved him, but that I could no longer be a part of his life as it was. The trust had been broken too profoundly. I told him that if, one day, he became the man his father had always hoped he would be, a man of integrity and honor, then perhaps we could find our way back to each other. But until then, we had nothing more to say. I sealed the letter and sent it to their new address, the small apartment across town. I never received a reply. I spent the next Christmas and every Christmas after that with Susan and her family. Her home was filled with the easy laughter and genuine affection that I had once mistaken for a given in my own family. I watched my nieces and nephews, now grown with children of their own, treat their mother with a deep and abiding respect. They included her, they valued her, they loved her. It was a beautiful thing to witness, though it always came with a pang of sadness for what I had lost. I still see my grandchildren. I arranged through David to have visitation rights. I pick them up every other Saturday. We go to the park, to the museum, to get ice cream. Their parents are never present at the handoffs. A neutral third party, a cousin of David's, facilitates the exchange. The first few times, the children were quiet and withdrawn. But kids are resilient. They have slowly opened up to me again. They tell me about school, about their friends. They do not talk about their parents, and I do not ask. They are too young to understand the complexities of what happened, and I will not burden them with it. I will simply love them, and hope that the trust funds I set up for them will one day give them the stable, secure start in life that their parents so carelessly threw away. Sometimes, late at night, I sit in Robert's chair in the study, and I think about it all. I feel the ache of the empty place in my life, where my son used to be. But I do not regret what I did. I regret that it was necessary. I regret the lies and the betrayal that forced my hand. But my decision, I do not regret. I reclaimed my dignity. I stood up for myself. I taught a hard lesson about consequences. They thought my love was a blank check, an endless resource they could draw upon without ever making a deposit of respect or gratitude. They finally learned the account was closed. And in the quiet solitude of my own home, a home that is truly mine, I have found a measure of peace. It is a lonely peace, to be sure, but it is peace nonetheless. And it is a peace I earned.